I think at this point what we're really doing is, what's the phrase I'm looking for? We're just checking off boxes. Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing over here. Because when it comes to this player and the trade rumors surrounding him, we've gone over all the teams that have been mentioned so far, except for one. We're talking about Chicago Blackhawks captain Jonathan Toews, we're revisiting the idea of him getting traded, and we're discussing whether or not the Edmonton Oilers could be a fit. Now, if you've needed an update on Jonathan Toews, if you haven't been following the NHL for a decade or so, you might know that Jonathan Toews has been a pretty good player. He was the captain of the Blackhawks, he captained them to 3 Stanley Cups, and you take a look at where he has gone ever since the glory days of Chicago. He took a season off in 2020-2021, came back in 21-22 with 37 points in 71 games played, and you take a look at the Blackhawks and you say, darn, that's a pretty bad roster. I mean, you saw their opening roster posted on Twitter a few days ago, and it's like, yeah, that roster kind of sucks, man. I'm sorry, Domi, Athanasiou, I like these guys. I like Patrick Kane. I like Jonathan Toews. They're talented players, but yikes. Losing out into Brinkett and Doc is going to do that to you. But either way, Chicago is in a pretty precarious position. They're tanking for Bedard. It's pretty clear to see what they're doing. And you have 2 franchise superstars in Kane and Toews who are making $10.5 million a season each. They both expire in 2022, 2023, or at the end of the season, and they both have trade protection. So, towards the end of the season, it wouldn't be a foregone conclusion to insinuate that either of these guys could be traded. By their own hand, of course, because they kind of have to dictate where that process will end up taking them. But the Blackhawks could ultimately get some assets in return for 2 franchise guys that have helped the team out in tremendous ways when it comes to winning championships. When it comes to Jonathan Toews, he is a 34-year-old 6'2", 201 left-handed center who still has his leadership abilities, he still has his face-off winning capabilities. Sure, he's not producing like he did 2 seasons ago where he had 60 points in 70 games. The season before that, in 2019, he was under a point per game, 81 points in a full season. But when it comes to the teams that have been sort of in the mix for Jonathan Toews and his services, we've talked about the Boston Bruins, we had spoken about the Colorado Avalanche, teams that might be able to use a center. However, it's Elliotte Friedman going out there and labeling yet another team that could be involved too. Friedman, on the recent edition of the 32 Thoughts podcast, says this: I assume Jonathan Toews is going to be traded. I assume Patrick Kane is going to be traded. We both said New York are the most likely team for Kane, or the Rangers are the most likely team for Kane. For Jonathan Toews, I mentioned Colorado. I know I'm trading everyone to Edmonton in this podcast, but I wonder if Toews would make sense there. Jeff Merrick says, here's another one. Would Toews make sense with the Boston Bruins? Now, the Bruins conversation is one that we actually had before. We made a video talking about this idea, and in it I pretty much said, yo, it's going to be kind of crazy if Bergeron and Toews are on the same team. I mean, talk about the defensive responsibility on that center core. With Krejci coming back too, ooh, my goodness, that sounds like a recipe for success in the very short term, because all these players are pretty old. But when it comes to Colorado, we had also had that conversation about how Toews could be one of 2 Toewses, or Tives? I don't know what the plural version of Toews would be. Devon Toews and Jonathan Toews could be sharing the jersey on their chest. But you also have the Edmonton Oilers entering this conversation as well. Friedman said it, man. He's trading everybody to Edmonton. And we had so many rumors about everybody under the sun being an Oilers target, from Chychrun to Kessel to Patrick Kane, teammate of Jonathan Toews. And there was that video we made earlier in the offseason saying that apparently the Oilers' plans, the plan A they had was to get Patrick Kane, the plan B they had was to get Phil Kessel. Neither of those plans ended up coming true, because Kane, at the time of recording this audio, was still a Chicago Blackhawk. Kessel went to the Golden Knights, and then it all sort of worked out properly because you ended up getting Dylan Holloway performing above expectations in the preseason, kicking out Puljujarvi and Yamamoto in that respect. Of course, Yamamoto is not healthy, so he's kind of not available in the same capacity. But either way, having Holloway go out there and be better than what we thought it would be, it adds another layer of offensive potency to the forward core of the Oilers. So for Jonathan Toews to potentially be yet another piece added on to what would be, I guess, a third line, because you're not going to displace one of Nugent Hopkins, Hyman, Kane, Draisaitl, or McDavid to make way for Jonathan Toews. I mean, I guess you could throw Holloway down a spot, but then again, he's kind of earned the position of being in the top 6 either way, so it's kind of interesting thinking about where Jonathan Toews could end up if he gets traded to a powerhouse offensively stacked team like Edmonton. All of a sudden, he's the third-line guy. Going from a Chicago team where he was supposed to be the main number 1 player for years to a lesser role on a team that's a lot better and that could use some defensive stability in their bottom 6. A guy who could go out there and kill penalties, just do what it is that you need to do as a defensive center with some leadership capabilities. You saw Duncan Keith, who had a pretty lackluster time in Edmonton. Okay, maybe not lackluster is the best word to use, but he was kind of there and he was sort of important, but who knows, if Duncan Keith is keeping in touch with Jonathan Toews saying, hey, it was pretty good in Edmonton. I mean, I had a pretty good run here and I had to retire because cap complaints, but either way, I was still here, had a good time. Maybe you should come over here, Jonathan. It's going to be fun. And maybe there's some sort of convincing that could go on there, because if the Oilers are not able to get somebody like Patrick Kane, Friedman is saying that the Rangers seem to be the most likely destination. Imagine Kane and Panarin playing together once again. Oh my goodness, that's going to be amazing. Think about it. Jonathan Toews does not have the same, let's just say, desire in the market as a Patrick Kane does. Sure, they're going to cost the same amount of money, especially if the Blackhawks retain 50%, but when it comes to what Jonathan Toews is, a very capable two-way center who has had some better seasons with points, who is coming off a year where he had to bounce back from 0 games played, so there's definitely an opportunity for him to maybe even produce a bit more, especially with the opened-up roles of Chicago forwards on this team. Who knows what exactly Jonathan Toews' market price is going to be, and if there even is going to be a quote-unquote bidding war for this guy. If Colorado and Boston all kind of say, hey, we kind of like him, let's try to get him. Oh man, the Oilers wanted to? Okay, I guess we're going to have to start outbidding each other one by one before the Blackhawks get themselves an offer they can't refuse. Who knows how exactly the trade market is going to go down, and who knows how much production guys like Kane and Toews are going to be able to take. For me personally, I took Kane in my fantasy hockey league alongside of other YouTubers that you might be aware of, Audie James, Hot Take Hockey, some very good names on the sporting YouTube sphere, all in there. I took Patrick Kane as one of my top picks, even though he was ranked to go a lot lower, because I was like, yeah, it's Patrick Kane. I mean, the guy's so talented, and even though he doesn't have DeBrincat anymore, I mean, Patrick Kane makes it work because he's Patrick freaking Kane. If the guy goes out there and scores like 50 points, I'd be disappointed. Knock on wood, he doesn't get injured or anything, but still, that's kind of what I'm feeling with his profile. Jonathan Toews, he's not in that same status. I feel like Toews could have a season where he gets 37 points again and everybody's going to be okay with it, or he could really just start producing a bit more, and I wouldn't be too surprised either. If he gets like 50 points, I'd be just like, okay, yeah, that's back to form for Jonathan Toews. It really depends where things are at the trade deadline, but either way, if you're an Oilers fan, talk to the comments your thoughts about the idea of Edmonton acquiring Jonathan Toews. What do you think about his name being thrown over to your team after Patrick Kane was thrown over there too? Chychrun is still a conversation that everybody's talking about too, and I guess there are other players that might be expiring free agents that the Oilers could interest themselves within as well, because, Ken Holland really wants to make the playoffs and do some damage. You guys made the 3rd round last year, so in theory, the only way to go is up. So if you're an Oilers fan, talk to the comments your thoughts about Jonathan Toews being linked to your team. What would you want to give up for Toews, and what is the minimum amount of points that you think Toews should be able to produce at for 22-23 in order for you to seriously consider adding him onto your squad? Furthermore, if you do add him onto your squad, where does it go? 3rd line center? Do you force him into the top 6 somewhere? 1st line penalty kill? 1st line power play even? Who knows? If you're a Chicago Blackhawks fan, what would you want in return for Jonathan Toews from Edmonton? They do have some pretty good prospects. I definitely don't want to go out there and discredit the Oilers' recent draft history. If you're an Oilers fan, what is the most you would be willing to give up? Is it Xavier Bourgault? Is he like the last kind of straw that you don't want to touch after him? Or Dylan Holloway even? Okay, that's a little bit too ambitious. I'm going to calm down there. Talk to the comments your thoughts about Jonathan Toews and the Oilers. I hope you enjoyed this British Rolls 99. And bye.